the end of this month, the original How to Make Webcomics book will be 10 years old?
No.
It for some reason, it jumped into my mind, and I went and looked it up, and the original copyright date on that book is January 31st, 2008.
That is not true. Why are you lying so much? 10 years ago?
10 years.
Oh my, wow.
Yeah,
wow.
Isn't that amazing?
So I bet if we went back and reread it now, it's like, when starting your first printing press.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, let's remember, I don't think there's a single word about like social media. A lot of social media hadn't really crested at that point.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
So there's not a lot of stuff about stuff like Facebook and Twitter. Certainly not a glimmer of crowdfunding.
Well, and here, you want to really date that book? I don't even know if YouTube was around in force 10 years ago.
Yeah, I'm sure if it was like a very, very shadow of what it would become. But that's you're actually leading me right into my question.
Okay.
If you could go back to that original How to Make Webcomics book and change one thing about it, what would you change?
Oh, wow.
Now, you can't foresee into the future, so you can't say, well, I would predict Twitter or something like that. But even given the source material, the stuff that we wrote about, what would you change?
So you're immediately discounting typos, right? Like I wouldn't go back and fix it.
Because there's most one typo, of which were mine, but yes.
There's one typo that's killed me for a decade. There's one typo that's killed me. But all right, what would I go back and change?
Shark mask.
Can I? Yeah. No. The honest to God truth, Brad, I don't know that I would change that much. I think that was a best effort for us 10 years ago. Now, that sounds Pollyanna-ish, but what are you leading me at? What do you want to change from 10 years ago?
I've got my thought on what it would be, but I was just wondering whether you looked at that book and said, oh, if there's one thing I would have done this one thing differently.
No, I'm going to say, and might sound stupid, but I'm actually quite proud of how we did on that book. I think we tried our best and helped a lot of people about sharing what we knew. Mm-hmm. Listen, isn't that rainbows and sunshine?
It really is. And you're setting me up to sound like the grumpy old curmudgeon that I have become, because I have a very definite answer for that, and it's something that I've reflected on a lot over the last 10 years, especially doing webcomics.com, and that is this. If I were to change one thing, it would be the fact that we didn't emphasize the quality of one's own work nearly enough. In other words, we went in and assumed the quality of the work, and our readers didn't. So
that's true.
When we talked about, if you make a comic, you put it on the web, and you go to a comic convention and you can expect, to sell this or that. Not all of our readers, obviously, but a significant portion of our readers expected that they could just do a comic and do the things that we talked about in the book, and by midnight they would be famous.
Well, no, I'm gonna hold you on this, because to Scott's credit, I think in his intro he specifically said, we're assuming in this book that you've done the 5 or so years of drawing, and now you're looking for the business acumen. Didn't he say that in the intro?
I'd have to go back and look. I don't remember it specifically, but you have a much better memory than I do.
No, that's not true. But maybe your central point is still stands in that we should have really emphasized that throughout the book. It's like, you can do all this, but don't take a second mortgage out on your house to make books if the books aren't good. Like, work on the quality of your comic first.
They see that they're not doing well, and they immediately assume it must be because I didn't print enough T-shirts, or it must be because I'm using Comic Press instead of Comic Easel, or it must be because they don't like me on Twitter, or something. They look for all kinds of reasons, and when you go to the comic and look at the comic, it's very obvious that the comic isn't very good yet, and they haven't earned that success yet. And it's not that they'll never earn it. It's just that, in my opinion, the longer they spend looking for all these external reasons for the fact that they haven't made it yet, or at least made it to the point they want to be at, the more time they spend looking outwardly instead of looking at the quality of the comic in real objective terms, the longer it's going to take them to actually find that success. Because the quality has to be first.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And in fact, and you can almost sense this intuitively now after almost 2 decades of doing this, is that even public clamoring for a book or a sticker or a shirt or something, it has to almost be to the point of being overwhelming before you're like, oh, maybe I should do a book. Because 4 people do not indicate a wave of interest, because I guarantee those 4, none of them will buy that book.
We've seen that happen time and time again.
Yeah. So not only does the quality have to get there, but you have to have years of people saying, no, for real, like, when's the book coming out? Or no, I'd really like this as a print, or, and it has to be a lot of people.
Right.
So your idea is a valid one. And maybe you're right. Maybe 10 years ago we failed, Brad. We failed our.
I wouldn't consider it a failure, but I do think that that's one tweak that I would make, that we would have talked more about quality.
I will say this, though, and this comes from trying to be instructive and helpful in comics, is that I am often accused of being too Pollyanna-ish and too optimistic and positive. But I have learned this the older I get, especially when writing instructive stuff, both when I used to work for Mattel and when I worked in comics, is that sometimes you can't assume how dumb people are. You can't assume that enough. Is that we made the assumption that people would be like, all right, I'm pretty good at cartooning. Now I'm going to tackle this how to make webcomic stuff. And you really have to drive home, like, no, you need to spend 5 years working on your cartooning first, and then tackle the business side of things. So yeah, good point, Brad. We failed. Way to start the show. Well, on that note, hi, everybody, and welcome to the Always Positive Comic Lab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I am Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive, and Sheldon and co-director of Strip.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab.
I like the way you end that.
Yeah, I like to hit that one big. So, Dave, I got to ask you, how's the move going?
Yeah, okay.
I've realized as this podcast is unfolding that this is going to be a theme now. We're going to know what point when we go back and listening to these podcasts, we're going to know what point we were by how the move has been treating you.
Yeah, you could. I'll get more. I'll descend more and more into madness.
I've descended to madness.
Yeah, exactly. Dave, you're like a living Hieronymus Bosch painting right now. Why do you sound so terrible? So I am currently in the 7th level of hell. I'm living. No, I'm joking, but I'm living out of 2 or 3 boxes. And you'll laugh at this. My entire family is living out of my studio because we are currently repainting the entire interior of the house. So we moved mattresses out to the office, and we are surrounded by clothes and boxes and suitcases. But it's fun. It's kind of like camping. It's family camping in the home. So.
Without the bears.
Yeah, exactly. I like how I'm trying to put a positive spin on it, but in the meantime, Brad, a single tear is rolling down my cheek. I'm going, no, Brad.
No, it's a lot like camping. It's not like being homeless at all. We're okay. We're camping.
Yeah, this is camping, Brad. It's fine. I haven't showered in a week, but it's camping. I tell you what, I went down to my in-laws who live not too far away, and I showered the other day and shaved, and I was like, I legitimately feel like $1 million. I could take on the world right now. You go a couple days without that, and you're like, oh boy, this really makes a difference.
Yeah. It's amazing how those little things kind of and affect your mental state too.
They do, yeah. I am far more distracted and discombobulated, but I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So the house is going to be listed on the market in about 2 weeks. So that's weird. Yeah, so pretty quick turnaround, all things considered.
That's very nice. Well, and until then, close quarters, that brings a family right together. That does.
I actually have to say, in all seriousness, it has been lovely. We've been telling stories in a shared room, and it's been lovely. So I think everybody will have come out of this. We went into it going, oh boy, but we'll come out of it going, oh, this actually was kind of a fun memory.
So now, in terms of like food, well, you've got a little kitchenette there, but if you wanted to go in and use your kitchen, would you be kind of like reticent to do that, or do you, or what's the rules on that, I guess?
Well, as you know, for when they come in with the industrial spray painters to really like power out a room, they tape the living heck out of it. And so the fridge is taped up, the stove is taped up, the microwave's taped up. So everything's behind 2 layers of plastic. And so, and as is true with a lot of the shower stuff. So I'm currently eating in the bush in the backyard, and but it has thrown a kink in the works in terms of comics. But actually, this is a good topic to swing around about unrelated to the move. Is that as many people who have listened to former Webcomics Weeklies and webcomics.com podcasts that we've done, I have long been wrestling with basically over orders on past books. So I've now done, I think, 15 different books, a couple of Drive books, a lot of Sheldon books, this and that. And as anyone who's done books before, sometimes you order the perfect amount. You're like, this is great. Oh boy, I've got an extra 100 left, which is kind of the perfect thing. And I'll sell those off for over a few years, and that'll be that. And then sometimes you underorder, and I've done that too. And I'm like, oh God, I need 2,000 more. And it's really painful to order a second time, because then your distributed costs for that print run are not shared, and you end up paying extra basically. So that's painful. But then over the 16 or 15 books, I also had 2, maybe 3 books that I basically got too excited. I was like, boy, my career's going gangbusters. Time to really order.
Well, I gotta believe that each of us that have been doing this for a long enough time have that one book. I know exactly which one it is in my series that I just ordered way too many, got way too full of myself. And I got to figure that each of us has that.
Well, and you will enjoy this as a punster yourself, is that the book that I ordered way too many of was a book that features my grandfather character in a towel on the cover, flexing into a mirror, and the title is Still Got It, right? That's the
And that's true of the last 450 copies. You still got them.
And then every time oh God, Brad, every time I look in the warehouse, I'm like, God bless America. I still got them. So what I did though is that I loaded up the old van, and I made it's more of an emotional decision than a business decision, because, and I say emotional because from a business standpoint, it absolutely makes sense to pulp them, because I made the book. I made a very healthy profit on the book. I just happen to have an extra 1,000 of them that I don't need and will never sell off. Like there's a certain point in a book's run where you can see the curve of sales, and it's fine. It's steady. You're still going to sell some for the next 5 or so years, but you'll never sell those last 1,000 off. So as is true with every publisher that's ever existed, you pulp them. And when you do that, you actually get a tax write-off. So from a business standpoint, it absolutely makes sense to pulp them. But the problem is I'm the publisher, but I'm also the artist. And so the emotional equation comes in. And it's been years of friends like Bill Barnes of Unshelved, or our friend Kevin McShane of BuzzFeed, pulling me aside and saying, like, listen, you just got to get over the emotion of it. It's not a failure as you're putting it in your mind. It's just a business decision, and pulp the books. And this move, really sort of the concentrated effort to move those 1,000 books to the new house was like, nope, no.
That's what finally pushed you over the edge, was just a thought of loading up all of those books into a U-Haul, right?
Oh God. Because then it's compounding failure. And then not only do you still have the books, now you're physically moving the books and ruining your 44-year-old back to get those books to the new house. So come hell or high water, we took them down to the pulping place, which could not have been more convenient. And what was amazing, and you'll enjoy this, from a sales point, their big selling point is you can watch. And so like,
oh
no, all their signage, as soon as you walk in, they're like, hi, have you been here before? You know, you can watch, you get to watch. Hey, would you like to watch?
God.
And so Beth, my assistant, and I were like, what the hell? Why is this a selling point? Why is this the big, like, every business has their key selling point. And then we figured it out that for people that are basically trying to get rid of either shady business documents or tax documents or anything like that, of course they want to watch. They're like, Hey, I got some paperwork here I need to get rid of. I need to make go poof.
We need to make this disappear.
Yeah, I need. Also, I got a human leg I got to get rid of. So for them, it's like, no, you're going to let me watch. And so that clearly has become a selling point. So they've got cameras on the shredder, and so they're feeding still got it into the shredder. And I'm going, but I have to say, I thought I was going to be a little bit sad. Nope. Total satisfaction in that moment, pulping those books. Yeah. Once I got to that point, and it took me years. It took me probably 3 years past when I should have pulped them. And I was like, all right, no, this was the right decision to make. And the reason I felt good about it was I had given away, I don't know, 400, 500 of them to literacy programs around the country. So Dolly Parton runs one. Believe it or not, Dolly Parton has a really good literacy program down in, I think, Tennessee and Kentucky. And then I gave a bunch to the USO for service members at airports.
Well, that's a good idea.
Yeah, because they're either coming or going to wherever they're being stationed, and so they can get a free book. And how nice to have comics. So I did that, and then there's a bunch of childhood age literacy programs around the country that will accept books. Usually like after school kind of, hey, mom and dad are still working, so we need a place for Junior to read. So here's a literacy and homework place. So anyway, if you are a cartoonist, check out options like that for giving away some books. And that was a worthwhile thing to do on my heart, even though the shipping was expensive. And then pulp the rest.
Was that a tax write-off by any chance?
Well, yes, it would be. It would be considered a donation.
Yeah.
So that's a write-off for my corporation at the end of the year. Both the shipping costs and the cost of goods sold for the book itself. Yeah. So anyway, just to put a button on that, I feel great about it. I gave away as many as I could logistically and then pulped the rest, and I feel great. I feel like a new man.
And you did end up watching.
I like how you managed to make that sound creepy. And you did end up watching?
Did you take video?
I actually did
you
take
really?
video, yes.
I'd be fascinated to see that, to be honest with you.
You know what? I'll put the video up on Patreon so that our patrons can see it.
I'd love,
at
put that up for our Patreon backers. I would love to see to get my mind around what that actually looks like.
Well, and you know what's funny? I think my assistant might have said this, is that she's like, you know what we should do? We should take the shredded material and use it as packing material for the other stuff that we have to move out of the house.
Brilliant. Except now you're still moving those books. They're just smaller pieces.
It's a heavy stock paper, so it's not really good for packing. But it's funny how it would have been circle of life kind of feeling to use it to pack up my other stuff.
It would have been kind of classy too, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but so I am thankful for the advice that Bill Barnes and Kevin McShane, our friends, gave me years ago to pulpit. I'm happy that I did it.
Yeah.
So, but that actually leads me into a question that I had for you, Brad, this week, which is, given their advice to me, what is the single best piece of comics advice, the single best one that you ever got for your career?
Well, when it comes to that topic, there's one that stands out because it really, not only did it shape my life, but it shaped everything about my existence for the next 20 years. And that was when I was in college. My entire senior thesis for my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree was comics and a lot of editorial cartoons, a lot of political cartoons. So the art department brought in Bill Day, who was the editorial cartoonist for the Detroit Free Press. He's still kicking around out there.
I actually know Bill Day, yeah.
And super nice guy, really sweet guy, and still, you know, like I said, he's still kicking around. He's not in Detroit anymore, but they brought him in as a juror for the senior show. And of course, you know, he was very kind, gave me lots of advice, brought me a signed copy of one of his collections, and we went out to dinner afterwards with my parents and he and I. And so I said, listen, I want to be, at that point, I really wanted to be a political cartoonist. And I said, tell me, how do I do this? And he said, well, here's the thing about, and at that point, this was early 90s, like 1991. You know, it was pre-internet, but not by much. You know, the internet was around, but it really hadn't crested like it would, obviously. So newspapers were still the name of the game for comic strips and editorial cartoons. And he said, here's the thing about being an editorial cartoonist. He goes, there's about, 150 jobs in America. And of those, 20, 25 of them are at good newspapers. And we are all waiting for one of the guys at one of the good newspapers to die. And then we all move up. That was his actual words. He says, when that happens, we all move up and a spot opens up at the bottom for you or one of the 3,000, 4,000 other people just like you who want that spot.
And so everybody goes shift. They all move over one, and then a spot opens up at the Sioux Falls Times in Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Yeah, and he goes, that's what you're looking at. So he goes, if I were giving advice to a young person, I would say get a job as a graphic artist on the editorial side, on the newsroom side of the newspaper. Don't go into advertising art because they put a wall up there between advertising and news, and for good reasons. And it's really hard to jump over that wall. So don't take a job as an advertising artist. Take a job as a newsroom artist. And at this point, see, the Apple computers, the Macintosh desktop computers, were kind of redefining art and design. And newspapers had jumped right onto these, bought a bunch of these, had them sitting on the desks, didn't have a whole lot of people who knew how to use them. So I came in, so it was the perfect time for somebody like me to come in, jump on one of those, and just start cranking out graphics that again, newspapers up until then were mainly black and white. USA Today came around with these bright colored graphics and got really popular. So every newspaper in America in the early 90s was looking for newsroom artists who knew their way around things like freehand, Illustrator, Photoshop, and could crank out these full color graphics. And so that's what I did. I got a job in Canton, Ohio, where I ended up meeting my wife, and not only it got the job, showed them my cartooning. They were a smaller metro-sized newspaper, big enough to pay well, small enough that I had a lot of latitude. And I said, hey, not only am I going to be, if you hire me, not only are you getting a graphic artist, but I'd like to submit editorial cartoons. The thought of them having their own editorial cartoonist was fantastic to them. So I became the de facto editorial cartoonist of the Canton Repository at the same time as I got this job.
Wait. Pause. Was the name of the paper the Canton Repository?
It was the Canton. Well, actually, no. The specific name was the Repository, and it was in Canton, Ohio, where the Football Hall of Fame is.
I like to think that my diction is strong, but I actually don't know the formal definition of the repository. Is the repository like the place you would keep data? Is that what the idea was?
Exactly right. It's also similar to a depository where you would deposit something. But this was a repository, so it would be like a holding place of information.
Okay, and then how many letters to the editor said repository, more like suppository?
Wink,
like,
am I right? Yeah, I got that a lot.
Yeah.
I got that an awful lot.
All right, we've moved on from that dumb thought that I had. Okay, so you wisely got a parallel job to get yourself the job you really wanted, which is one of the classic good moves in a career, is that always be angling for the job you want, but be building up your skill set in parallel industries.
Right, and it was a good paying job. It was a union job, so I got good benefits, good pay, and actually for a little while, it was looking like I was going to be a newspaper artist, even more than a cartoonist, because all of a sudden this stuff starts taking off. I'm doing these full page informational graphics that are knocking people's socks off, and all of a sudden I'm being, I'm going out to conventions like Society of Newspaper Designers, and I'm giving presentations and stuff, and it's looking like this might be more of a career for me. And for an awful long time, I was sliding towards that. I was becoming very well known in newspaper circles for not only being like a newspaper artist, but I would go out, and by the time I was working at my next newspaper job, which was the Akron Beacon Journal, I would regularly get sent out to cover news along with the reporter and the photographer.
So at this point, the narrator should come into the story and say, Brad's career was going well, but he hadn't seen the internet.
Exactly. You're exactly right. And when that came around, I remember talking even back as far back as Canton. I remember talking to editors in chief, managing editors, people, anyone who would listen, saying, "Take a look at eBay. If you can't see that eBay is going to destroy your classified advertising section, which was really beyond." Paid advertising, beyond subscription costs or subscription prices. Classified ads paid the bills at a newspaper. And if you can't see that eBay is going to destroy you, you're nuts. I got all of the same things. People are always going to want to hold a newspaper in their hands. They're never going to replace that. And they spent the next several years whistling past the graveyard. But I could see very clearly on the horizon that being a newspaper graphic artist was not going to be something that I was going to ever be able to retire from. And so at that same point, it was like, okay, it's time for me to start thinking about cartooning again. That's always been there, but it was kind of a back seat. And so I started working on a comic strip and started developing that. And by the time it was made clear to me that I had gotten as far as I could go in newspapers, I basically took my 9 weeks of subscription submission material, posted it on a GeoCities site, and basically never looked back.
So now I think I might have missed it, but what was the central one piece of advice you got that changed your life?
Oh, it was him saying, get a job in newspapers. Yeah, and that may be a little bit specific for me, but I want to drill down because obviously I wouldn't give that advice today. But it goes to a deeper thing that I'm really passionate. I've got about 3 topics that I really want. I am, for lack of a better word, evangelical about, and that's one I really want to talk about over the course of the next year, and that is destigmatizing the day job. That you are still a professional cartoonist if you have a day job. Having that day job makes you no more or less legitimate or significant than not having a day job.
Oh, and I'll one up you because so many of us grew up idolizing syndicated cartoonists, and the dirty little secret is some of the people that are lower down on the ladder of syndication also still have a day job. So it's not like this is. It's kind of the quiet secret among cartooning that sometimes for the first decade in a lot of different fields, New Yorker cartoonists, syndication, webcomics, you've got the day job. And the basic idea there is that it gives you mental stability, financial stability, insurance stability to really chase that dream so that when you're ready to take the big leap, you're not coming at it with a can of beans in your hand. You're coming at it with a car and a house or an apartment or, whatever you need to have made a stable life for yourself in the meantime.
Yeah, that's huge. And I look back over, especially like the last few years of having a day job, like in the 2010s, 11s, 12s, and into 13. I was so obsessed with that idea of quitting my day job, and I really was. It was an obsession. And I don't know that it was entirely healthy. I mean, on one hand, I was driven. There's no doubt about that. I was driven. This was a monumental goal for me. But it was also, and in that regard, it was good. It was good to be driven. But it also created this atmosphere where it was the only way I could think of myself as a real cartoonist, as an official cartoonist. And the fact of the matter is when I was finally faced with a layoff from my newspaper job, and it was kind of like, all right, you can take a buyout or we're probably going to fire you. And I was finally forced into making that decision. I was thrilled that I was going to be finally, like Pinocchio, I was finally going to be a real little boy. And I made the announcement and I'm leaving my day job. I'm going full time. And it was like, I remember I made the announcement shortly before showing up for Emerald City Comic Con. And I had these fantasies about, walking in with a golden glow. And the fact of the matter is I was the same schmuck that had walked those floors the year before. And the only person that thought about me differently was me.
Oh, okay. Yes, I get that. But I do want to say that there are, it was not a wasted goal. And it's not a silly goal, and it's a worthwhile goal because, if no other reason than when you are able to do cartooning full time, mm-hmm. you have been able to tackle so many different things as a cartoonist full time that you couldn't have been able to do as a full time, or as a 40-hour work week and then a 40-hour cartooning week.
Without a doubt.
I know that because when I went full time, what was it, in 2007 from Mattel, it was the same kind of thing. I was both terrified and overjoyed to do it, and then quickly realized that I had just a near infinite amount of time comparatively to do the projects and the books and the comics that I wanted to do. It's not an accident that Drive started, I guess, a year after I quit Mattel, and then Strip started a year or two after that. Like, I couldn't have made the movie, I couldn't have made Drive, yeah. I couldn't have done all those 15 books had I not. So it's not like it's a wasted goal. But it's not true that you're not a cartoonist until you're able to quit that job. I was just, if anything, I was working harder while I was doing Mattel and working on Sheldon. So it's both true that you are still a cartoonist and a professional cartoonist when you are maintaining the day job, but it's also true that you do have more time. So it is a worthwhile goal.
No, you're absolutely right. I can't discount that. The ability to spend more time on projects and develop out a bigger, range of projects has definitely been a boon for me.
I actually want to jump back for a second because I'm fascinated that both you and I don't know that we've ever talked about this. We both started our career wanting to be political cartoonists.
Yeah. I did. Yeah, I didn't realize that. I guess I knew you did political cartoons, but I didn't know that it was a priority for you.
Well, yeah, like for whatever reason, I always thought that's where the fun job is, being a political cartoonist. At least in my college years, something about college makes you a little more political than you need to be. But anyway, when I was in grad school in San Diego at UCSD, I drove my little portfolio in my two-tone 1986 two-door brown Buick Regal. I drove that down to the San Diego Union Tribune, and I literally kept knocking on doors until I got to the editor of the editorial page, Bob Kittle.
Really? So you were just you didn't have I guess this was the days before visitors passes were ubiquitous, but you just got into the building and started roaming the halls?
Well, no. I went to the I don't remember the exact mechanics of it, but I basically went to the security guard at the front desk and I said, "Hi, I'd like to," and I probably sounded like this. "Hi, I'd like to audition to be an editorial cartoonist. And I sure would like to do it, and I think it'd be swell." And then he puts down his donut and he says, "Level 4, door 22," that kind of thing. So I take the elevator up and I first introduce myself to the wrong editor, and he stops me about 2 minutes into the pitch and he goes, "Oh, whoa, I do sports. You're at the wrong desk."
I don't got time for this shit.
Yeah. It's like, "I'm sorry, I thought you were." Anyway, keep going. You're one door down. So I go down to the next room, and Bob Kittle sits me down. And to his great credit, and I don't know why he did it, he sat and listened to my pitch, and he said, "I really admire that you're fire here, and I tell you what, why don't we have you come in and we'll start you just cleaning up Steve Kelly's scans."
Oh, really?
Right? I think that was the first thing. So Steve Kelly, who's still working, was the staff cartoonist for the San Diego Union Tribune, and I think the first 2 months I just cleaned up his scans and maybe helped him with his. Do you remember those old super cancer-causing washes that you would physically paint on? Paper. What was that called? Duotone?
Yes.
Was that what the name of it?
Yes, and it had cross hatching built into the Bristol board, but it wouldn't come out until you painted them with basically photo fluid.
Yeah, and it was a beautiful process, and it created beautiful lines, and all sorts of pros used it at the time, called Duotone. But it has since come out that like 19 different types of cancer get caused by that stuff.
Oh,
so
really?
It's like, oh great, I'm so glad I worked with it.
Yeah, I used to work with it all the time too when I could afford it.
Yeah, so I think I did like whiteout cleanups on Steve's. I mean, very little. I did. I don't know that I did very much because it was his work, but I did. I think I did mostly electronic cleanup on stuff.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the editor said, "You know what? You get Saturdays and Mondays starting next week."
Oh my God! Really?
Yeah, and this is when I started to realize that I didn't want to work for the man. I did a comic, one of my first ones. I did an editorial cartoon where I talked about the corruption of the local sports stadium. Right?
Yeah.
And I brought it in, real proud of it. Oh, this is going to be a great comic. Oh, this will teach the world. And Bob, to his great credit, sits me down. And he goes, "Well, it's time for you to learn a little bit about the world." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, part of the owner of that stadium is part of the owner of this newspaper." And I go, shit.
And this cartoon is never going to run.
He goes, yeah, exactly. He goes, "So guess what's not going in the paper? This comic."
Oh my
he goes,
gosh.
"In good news, I think it's a great comic, and I think it brings the point home, but." He goes, it's something to the effect of like, you got to know what side your bread's buttered on. And I was like, and that was sort of the beginning of the end, is that I realized both that and that I realized to be an editorial cartoonist, you have to live your life sort of angry all the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't be at peace with the world, and you can't take a sort of Zen Buddhist attitude about the world. You have to be like, no, I'm angry, and this is why I'm angry, and the world is unfair.
And not only that, but you can't exist in the middle. There's no room for equivocation or nuance. You not only have to take a side, but you have to take a strong side on one side. And because that's where the humor is, right? You can't find humor in the middle. You go to one side and exaggerate, and that's where the funny is.
Right. And so it's for the same reasons that I eventually decided that I didn't want to be a lawyer in college, which is that so much of law is either you're in the fight, you're anticipating the fight, or you're trying to prevent a fight, right? Like that's 99% of what law is like centered around fights. And so I was like, I don't want to be a lawyer and I don't want to be an editorial cartoonist. And then I went back to my childhood love, which was comic strips. So anyway, that was a long walk to that final story.
And also I think we both have to note politics in general has gotten so divisive, and it used to be the political cartoonists were the angry ones. Now it's everybody, And I just took a look at that, on the horizon. It was getting that way in the late 90s, and it was just like, I don't want any part of the amount of actual hate and vitriol that goes into a political discussion today.
Yeah, it's too much. It's too much bile, and unfortunately, you probably know this. Like, I go to the National Cartoonist Society meetings, and it's nice, it's pleasant. But have you ever been to the American Association of Editorial Cartoonists meetings?
I've always wondered about it, though.
I'm not joking. So I dropped in on one of them once, and it's a lot of vodka and scotch. I'm not joking. It's a lot of heavy drinking. I think both because their careers are having trouble because newspapers are literally dying on the vine, but also I think it's because of that your life is filled with vitriol and bile, and you're like, I don't know. I think I will have some whiskey. Yes, thank you.
So now let me ask the same question to you, Dave. What's the single best bit of cartooning advice anyone ever gave you?
So back in the day, this was from Wiley Miller, who is of Non Sequitur.
Ooh, really?
The comic strip Non Sequitur. And I don't know Wiley well. I mean, we would probably recognize each other in a room and would say hi and be pleasant, but I don't know him well. I wouldn't claim to be close with him. But back in the day, there was an early form of forums and chat rooms on the web, and you might remember these. I don't remember what they were called, but it was like rec.arts.comicstrips.
Yeah, I remember those. Yeah, I know. I forget what they were called, but they were. I want to say message boards, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so it's just basically think of forum, but think of a forum in 1997, right? Like it was really early.
Really early.
This advice was not even advice he was giving to me, but I internalized it and made it so central to the next 10 years of my life that I am still thankful to him for this. And it might not even have been his advice to give. Maybe he got it from someone else. But Wiley Miller, at one point on this forum, we were talking about careers, and younger cartoonists were asking him, what was his key to success in making Non Sequitur and this and that? And he said, the greatest thing I can tell you is that no one will ever care about your career as much as you do. And so you need to operate accordingly. And I was like, that turned on a light switch on my mind. Wow. that even if I got with a syndicate, they wouldn't care about whatever I did as much as I did.
Right.
If I got with a publisher, they wouldn't care about what I did as much as I did. If I got with an agent, they wouldn't care about what I did as much as I did. So that meant that was the beginning of me starting to wear every hat in my career and learning how to do it and mastering each of those hats as best I could. Because, by God, if a publicist was only taking me for a check, then I was going to be my own publicist.
Right.
And if a publisher was only caring about me in terms of their next quarter and no longer after that, then by God, I was going to publish my own books. And if a syndicate only cared about me if I could get into 100 plus papers at launch, then by God, I was going to do my own webcomic and control it on the web. And I have to say that single piece of advice, that no one would care about my career as much as I did, has been a guiding light to so many decisions that I've made. And I am eternally grateful to him. And I don't think I've ever told him that, but I should next time I see him, that single bit of advice has been a godsend to me.
That's incredible. And really, you can see that pathing down through your career.
Oh, yeah. And at the time, had you pulled me aside and you said, like, is this a through line for your decision making? I might not have seen it. But now, older, looking back on it, I was like, oh, God, yes, that was absolutely the dividing thought, is that because, you take certain trepidatious steps in your business where you're like, all right, I'll do a distribution contract with this smaller company. Oh, whoa, I got burned. And you learn from that. Or you're like, oh, I might do some warehousing of books with this company. Whoa, I got burned there. Oh, I might do a T-shirt with this small startup company. Oh, God, I got burned again. And with each one of those, it would reinforce that no one would care about my career as much as I did. And so to take ownership of it and control it and to run the ship myself. And it a little bit goes back to that point also at the beginning of the podcast that I made, which was the slow dawning realization that sometimes people are a little bit dumber than I give them credit for, and that maybe I was smarter than the average bear and could figure it out on my own.
Yeah. Well, and obviously that knife cuts both ways, right? I mean, for you being a positive-minded person, you took a look at this as an opportunity. Nobody's going to care about your career as much as you. The other side of that is that was an awful lot of work. Right? You had a learning curve. It meant learning how to do publishing, learning pre-press production, learning, the business decision behind how to set a price correctly. That was an awful lot of work that you took on too. But obviously, it's paid off exponentially so.
Yeah, it's absolutely been more work, but it's also been more rewarding in the long run, because even those skill sets that I don't think would impact my cartooning itself eventually comes around to impact my cartooning. And I'll give you a small example. Mm-hmm. So I've slowly learned how to use Adobe InDesign, Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Photoshop over the years, right? You get better and better as you go. And the vector-based programs like Illustrator and InDesign, well, maybe InDesign is not vector, but it's kind of a mix. But anyway, the vector programs like Illustrator, for me as a pen and ink cartoonist, you wouldn't think that would be naturally useful, but it was helpful for laying out books. But eventually there were cartoon ideas that I was like, you know what? For this cartoon idea to work, I need to perfectly spoof a magazine cover to become the comic. And so, 5 years earlier, I learned how to use InDesign to lay out a book, but now I was using InDesign or Illustrator to spoof an actual magazine cover. So it all came around, and in that sense that everything eventually finds its way into your cartooning, those skill sets found their way into my cartooning and made that joke work only because I could perfectly mimic a Wine Spectator cover or a Dog World cover, that kind of thing. So it all comes around. Yeah, it was absolutely more work, but it's worth it in the end, I think.
Well, in a weird sort of way, that leads to the next topic I've got in front of me here to throw at you, and that's a question we got on the Discord server that I'd like to talk about next. And it is this. This person wrote in, on one hand, I hear you saying that the real game is in social media and we need to keep pumping out our content through those channels. On the other hand, I hear you saying that the goal is to set up a Patreon paywall where you lock up past content from everyone except subscribers. Those two ideas seem contradictory to me. How do I put things on social media and say, please share this around, and at the same time say I'm stuffing my archive behind a closed door? Once you release a comic into the wild, how do you rein it back in so you can lock it away?
That is a great question. And it's a new balance that we're all kind of trying to strike.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say that it's a kind of a new dance that we're all trying to figure out?
And it's a fair comment. There are probably I don't know. I could think of a couple of different ways to do this, and I think that as we move forward, we're going to be developing different ways of approaching this. For example, one way might be to integrate that PayPal API into your WordPress site, like we were talking about a couple podcasts ago. The obvious answer for me is that you've got two series. You've got one series of cartoons that you put out and share on social media, and you've got an exclusive series that is for Patreon only. And this would work particularly well if you've got something that that strikes a certain demographic very hard. Now, for this guy, I know this guy through the internet and so forth. And I know that he does a bunch of cartoons that hit a Christian theme. Now, to me, this is a no-brainer. You do your generic cartoons out there, and then you put those Christian-themed comics behind a paywall. So everybody who is going to be intensely interested in that theme are going to have a reason to subscribe.
So your idea, and I like this one, your idea is that if there is a topic, if there is a theme, if there is a subset of the comic that can be intensely focused on your true fans, your 1,000 true fans, or lack of a better phrase, that's what you would lock behind Patreon. And maybe lock is not the right word. I like the idea that it's, I don't know, a walled community rather than a paywall.
It's subscription content. I mean, when you put a magazine out, it's not locked in the magazine, but you got to pay for the magazine.
Sure. Unless you're me and you're 20 and you just stand at the newsstand for. I did. I was so cheap when in my 20s. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But yeah, so I think I'll build on what you said. And I think there's a couple ways to do this. Another way to do this is if you are a comic strip cartoonist, or even because I don't think this would work for long form, but if you're a comic strip cartoonist, you could do the Go Comics model with Patreon, which is the last or the most recent 30 or 60 or 90 days, whatever level you're comfortable with. That's open and free to the public. And so that's going out on social media. But then as people get hooked, you can say, well, by the way, there's an archive of 1,000 comics. Right. Behind Patreon walled community, or behind whatever system you want to set up. So that's one possibility. So you basically hook them in with a lot of the free stuff, and then you have the archives to unlock. Yeah. And then I think for long form storyline, another way you could do it is that because it's really hard to lock off a story if someone needs to start at the beginning. So you have the entire story free to read, but then what you do is you either do extra short stories, you do bonus content, you do behind the scenes, or you do character backgrounds from the story, or hidden history from that world that the story takes place in.
All of that world building stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I think those are 2 or 3 possibilities for how you could make that work.
Yeah, well, and that's why I wanted to lead into this after the previous topic, and that is this. I don't want to discourage people from sending us questions, but here's my one little bone to pick, and that is, instead of asking us to solve this problem for you, what I would have rather seen was you gave us 2 different concepts that don't seem to jibe. Here's my solution for this. What do you think? In other words, like Dave was talking about just a little bit earlier, you should be pushing people out of the way, demanding that you solve this problem for yourself, not asking somebody else. Because Dave and I can give you steps and recipes and all kinds of things like that. But you need to be able to do this on your own, too. And so I'm going to encourage you. And by all means, don't stop sending questions in, but I'm going to encourage you to take an active role in this too and say, these 2 concepts don't seem to make sense. I'm going to tell you how I solved them. Tell me what you think.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're saying, come to Brad and Dave with a more finalized, a next step basically on the question.
And then we can give you thoughts on what you came up with, certainly.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
But asking us to solve this problem for you, we can do it. I mean, we just sat and came up with, it sounded like 5 different answers to that question, each of which had value. But you didn't learn how to solve the problem for yourself. And one of these days, Brad and Dave aren't going to be around. There's going to be problems that you're going to need to solve for yourself.
Wait. I want to go back to this. Are they going to send Brad and Dave up to the farm upstate? I don't want to.
Well, listen, that's where we can chase with the other puppies and we have a better life there, really. We'll be more happy there.
But I loved Brad and Dave. I don't want to see them go. They were
Well, maybe not be around, or let's put it this way, might not be available to answer your questions. How's that?
No. The greater point is absolutely true, is that you need to become the omnipotent narrator of your own life, which is that you need to take charge of steps and actions. And so that's probably a better answer to that question, which is, like Brad said, we're happy to give advice, but on that one, maybe throw some possibilities at us of what might work for yours, and we can give you some feedback.
Yeah,
I think that's great.
And besides, I love seeing what people come up with when that starts to happen. The irony there is that in the same way I've said for a long time that cartoonists really stink at social media because they come in with the wrong mindset and they think that everything has to be completely original, just like their comics. On the other side of that coin, a lot of cartoonists tend to be really poor business people because they fail to take the same creative enthusiasm to business problems that they do to creativity problems.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Right.
If you think about it, cartoonists have such an incredible advantage in business as business people. Such an incredible advantage in that we can think outside the box. We can think non-linearly, especially those of us working in humor. We can think in several directions at once. All of those things lead to making good business decisions, except we don't. We think that should only be used in this one little area over there. And the fact of the matter is that if you take that same creativity you bring to making comics and you bring that to a business problem, you'll be amazed at what you are able to do.
Well, and I will absolutely one up that too, because I completely agree with you, Brad. I think that's a great point. And also I would say that in as much as you need to be an omnipotent narrator of your own career, you also need to be omnivorous in consuming and watching like a hawk what very smart cartoonists are doing in their own career.
Oh, yeah.
And it can't just be within your own circle. You have to see depending on who you read, you have to be following what is Matt Inman doing with the oatmeal and why is he taking those steps? What is Spike doing with Iron Circus and why is she doing those steps? What's Rich Steven doing with his T-shirts and why is he doing that? And the list goes on and on and on. Why is a Bill doing XYZ with Foxtrot? And think about the steps of why they're doing the things that they're doing, both financially and from a branding and marketing standpoint. And you'll start to see all right, they might be making a mistake as far as I see, but let me think of why or how I could apply that to my own career. Learn from their mistakes, learn from their successes, and bring it into what I do.
And the most important part of what you just said was the word why. It's one thing to say, what is somebody doing? And then too often we just follow what they're doing and we do what they're doing without understanding why. And that's where the failure comes in, because we didn't understand why. You've got to understand why they're doing what they're doing. By all means, go back and listen to what Dave just said and underline the word why every time he said it. Because it's the most important concept there. We have to understand why they're doing what they're doing. Only then can you apply the what to your own needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, and this builds off that idea that we might be able to give answers, is that one of the reasons why Brad and I can't be a source of perfect answers for you is that we ourselves are omnivorously consuming what other cartoonists are doing. We're watching each other like a hawk. I can guarantee you that they're watching us and we're watching them to see what they do. And every time we're at a Comic-Con, every time there's a new Kickstarter, every time there's a launch, we're seeing what did they tinker with? Why did they make that change to the way they pitch it? Oh, how did they structure the way their stretch goals work on this Kickstarter? Oh, how did they do this publishing distribution contract? And why did they do a publishing distribution contract, and why are they avoiding Diamond and this or that? And so Well, no, that wasn't a joke. I was like, these are all decisions. Like, why are they doing it the way they're doing it? And you basically are tapping into a hive mind that's larger than yourself of like, okay, there must be good reasons. Let me think of why they would be doing X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And then you can apply that reasoning to your own work. Oh, I see. They're doing this perhaps as a loss leader to get people interested in XYZ, and then they're going to make their real money off of Patreon or off the Kickstarter or off the book or off the t-shirt, whatever it is. And then you can say, okay, how can I learn to apply a loss leader, or how can I learn to have a promotional event the way they did?
Right.
How did they do this book signing? How did they do this distribution deal? I'm just throwing out examples of all the things that we try to keep an eye on with other artists, because each one of those you can learn from by dissecting their decision making.
That goes right down to why I'm a little bit reticent to answer a question like that, is because I don't know what your why is, but you do. So
yes, absolutely. Like, and in the same way that we're watching one another, the decisions that I make for Drive are not perfectly appropriate for Rich Stevens for Diesel Sweeties or for Spike for Iron Circus, and vice versa. The decisions for what they make or produce or how they do it or market or create don't work for me. But there are nuggets in there that if I break it down, I can take away the essence of what they're doing and apply it to Sheldon or Drive or to Stripped or to Comic Lab or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And in so doing, I take the best thought process behind what they do and I apply it to my own work.
Yeah, that's well put. I can't make that any better. And as a matter of fact, that's a good place for me to tell you this. You've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been the ever delightful and wonderful Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And the avuncular and cuddly Dave Callett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net.
Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/Comic Lab, so we'll go ahead and say that twice, patreon.com/Comic Lab. Hey, if you don't want to be a Patreon supporter, that's fine. If your budget doesn't allow it, here's how you can support us on the cheap. Go over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. That gets the show out there, lets us communicate with an even wider audience. It's going to take you about 5 seconds, but it's going to make a huge difference in our reach. If you are a Patreon supporter, be on the lookout for our next exclusive Pro Tips episode. It's going to be a good one. We had Lucy Bellwood come by for yet another swing, and I think you're really going to like it.